Hello and welcome to the first ever Motor podcast. My name is Scott Newman, Associate Editor of Motor Magazine, and with me is Editor Dylan Campbell.
Hello.
And recording in the back is Josh Robinson. So, what is the Motor podcast? Well, it's a place that we can talk about all things performance car related, usually from behind the wheel of one. So, Dylan, what are we in today?
We are sitting in the slightly new HSV GTS. So this is the new 30th anniversary model. This car hasn't changed much since the previous model. It has 430 kilowatts. Still has the 6.2 litre supercharged V8, the famed LSA. The price has gone up a little bit for this car. So it was
95,990, I think.
Yeah, it's now 98,990. So it's gone up $3,000 for the manual. And if you want the auto, it's an extra $2,500. So this car that we're sitting in at the moment is actually 101,490 now, but it's still a fair beast of a thing. You get a lot of car for your money. 430 kilowatts, 740 newton meters. The only mechanical changes with this car are the bimodal exhaust, which now opens differently. And HSV,
Turn that on.
Yes, turn it on. That is a must every time you get into the car. HSV has also ditched Tour mode. HSV says Sport is now Tour and so on. But we're not super convinced about that.
But before we get into speaking about the nitty-gritty of this car, Dylan, I want to ask you, what was the first HSV you drove?
The first HSV I drove would have been probably an LS3 Club Sport, a Gen F, I think. So
Gen F?
Yeah, if I think back.
You never drove an E-Series car?
I don't think I did, no.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was late to the party a little bit.
Yeah, cool. I think the first one I drove was called a GXP, I think. It was the Pontiac front end.
Oh, okay.
It was back in like 09. They did that like super cheap. It was 62 grand or something. It was like the base of their model. The base model, it was kind of almost redundant now that once Holden brought out the red line, but I think that was the first one I drove. Or if not, it was an E-Series Club Sport R8, which was a really good thing, but it was funny that they sort of became kind of redundant when the Gen F cars came out when this car came out, because it was such a big step forward in performance and everything. So when was the first time you drove one of these? Was it Bucotti? 2013?
Yeah, the first time I drove a Gen F GTS was a Bucotti 2013.
Yeah.
I think it may have been on the track as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Broadford. But yeah, such a good car, the Gen F GTS.
It is a good car. That was What were your first impressions when you first drove it?
Oh, it's got incredible grunt. Like, it's a big, heavy car fundamentally. 1903 kilos, I think. But huge amount of power. The best numbers we've got out of a Gen F GTS, 4.3, 1 to 100, which is pretty stonking. I think that probably would have been with the manual.
Yep, that was a manual. I did those numbers. I'm not sure I could ever do it again. It was a bit of a fluke of a launch. It was funny though that this car hasn't. You say that the numbers on this car haven't changed. It's still 430 kilowatts, 740 newton meters. But I remember when I think I might have actually been the first journo to drive the Gen F GTS.
Okay.
Pre-launch, I'd picked it up. I helped out Wheels magazine with a shoot, and me and Nathan Ponchard went and did the first comparo with the car pre-launch, and I picked it up from HSV on trade plates, hadn't been registered yet.
Yeah, right.
So that was kind of interesting, the first person to drive this car and driving through Melbourne and everyone sort of looking at you, because it did get, it wasn't out yet, so it did get quite a lot of looks, especially with no number plates on it. But it was interesting that, like, the first numbers, Ponch is damn good at performance testing. He did 4.7 to 100.
Yeah. And
most people were getting about that 4.6, 4.7. But now, 4.3, 4.4 is the sort of norm. So it's interesting that the car hasn't changed. It seems to, I don't know whether we've just got better at performance testing it, or if maybe there's something happening under the skin that we don't know about. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting that the car hasn't gotten faster, but it kind of has got faster. So
yeah, it's funny with these cars, like the Gen F2 and also the VF2 with the SS Commodore. They put on paper the changes, but then we drive them and you think, have they changed this? It feels a little bit different. But
it was like the manual gearbox thing in the Gen F2 thing.
Right,
like they swore black and blue the gearbox was absolutely identical.
Yeah.
But whenever you drive a VF2 Commodore, it does make a good noise.
It does.
A Gen F2 HSV or a VF2 Commodore, the manual gearbox just feels slicker, it feels easier to change.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a placebo effect or if they're just being a little bit cagey about what they're telling us.
That's right. Yeah. Go to Holden or HSV and they'll say, no, we changed nothing on it, but yeah, it seems to feel a little bit better, easier to drive.
So let's go quickly onto your thoughts about this car. You've said obviously your first impressions were that it was very fast, very powerful. You've driven one like me on quite a few occasions now. What's your what's your takeaway from this car? What do you really like about it, and what maybe don't you like about it?
Well, I mean, from the get-go, I love this car. It's just, there's so much to like about it. I feel very affectionate about this car, strangely. I'm not sure why. It's just a good thing. Makes me proud to be an Aussie driving this. Yeah, it's a big heavy car, but it's got surprising amount of grip. You get a lot of feedback through the car when you're driving it fast. Yeah, it's got crazy grunt. When you get onto the open road, it feels like it has the longest legs in the world. It just charges ridiculously hard. It's got good traction as well. But then if you want that nice rear-driven feeling, that's completely available in this car, just with a flex of the right foot, if you like. It's interesting, the noise with these things, like it's funny with HSVs, with the Gen F and now the Gen F2. Like for me, I think they sound good, but they've never sounded amazing. Like you get in like a Chrysler 300 SRT or even the LS3 SS, and like you get out of it and you go, oh, that sounds good. It really scratches the itch from a sound point of view. But for me, HSVs have they've been good but not great.
It's interesting. I love the way this car sounds. It's like, I don't know. It's maybe it's the little bimodal tweak that they've made. It's the tweak they needed to make. It was only a tiny little thing, but yeah, I keep driving around in performance mode, and the pops and bangs that happens when you go on the overrun. It's like, I don't know. It's just became more complete. Like I'm with you. I've always thought that they sound great, but not in the same way maybe as an AMG or something like that. Whereas this, it really ticks the box. You can hear it now. And they have gotten rid of that chuff, it seems.
I was going to ask you that. How they said that they've changed the bimodal exhaust. How does it sound like it's changed now that you've spent a bit of time driving around?
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it just then. It's in the previous bimodal exhaust HSVs, you'd hit the throttle and it would go as the sort of valves opened. And it sounded really strange. Sounded really a bit naff, really, but they've tweaked that and they've gotten rid of it, as you can just hear, and it's only a tiny thing, but it's really improved that sensation of the car. It feels more natural, it feels more organic now, which is kind of cool. As there wasn't much wrong with this thing to begin with. I mean, that's a good question. Like, how would you improve this thing?
Yeah, how would you?
The list is pretty small.
That's right. I mean, I think this is an excellent car. And even though the price has gone up a fair bit, it's still great value for money, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, 100 grand is a lot of money for us.
It's pushing it, but I mean, you're getting like M5 performance still for 80 grand less. You can't buy the M5 anymore. But it's a lot. This is
a nicer car to drive than an M5.
Big call.
Big call, but I'd happily stand by that. It's I mean, the amazing thing for this car, even when I first drove it way back when, it was coming from V series, like VZ Commodores, even VE Commodores. The thought of a Commodore with 430 kilowatts, you're just like, it's just going to be an animal. It's going to be all over the shop. But the thing you get when you drive this car, it feels so cohesive. Like it could almost handle more power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it as fast as maybe you expect a 430 kilowatt car to be? Yeah. But I mean, you drive a 430 kilowatt German car and it is next level fast. But the traction and the brakes, I think you'll agree, like HSV have the best brakes in the world.
Yes.
Them and Porsche probably. But maybe to the uninitiated, for even you to mention those two brands in the same sentence may sound strange, but like brakes on HSVs, you can take this 2-ton car to a track and drive it all day long, and it's fine. It's no problem at all. Yeah,
I mean, it's such a funny thing to talk about, but brake pedal feel.
Yeah.
Like in a big heavy car like this, you get so much detail through the brakes, and it's like just the right amount of like assistance. They're nice and firm. The pedal doesn't get too long or anything like that. Sounds like a weird thing to say, but they just feel great. Like just using the brakes is such a satisfying feeling.
The other thing for me is the ESP in this car. It's so good.
Absolutely.
Like it's got, you don't really necessarily need it because it's got great traction and it can use the power, but equally this performance ESP setting, it'll let the car, slide around, sometimes alarmingly so. You can really get some opposite lock on the car on a track or anything or something like that, but it doesn't like clamp down on the car and make it feel like it's dying. It just it really allows you to enjoy the car while still not going too crazy in a $100,000 almost 600 horsepower car.
Yeah, that's right. Credit to HSV, good old Australian company making a world-class ESP system that it actually, it sort of respects your ability, if you like, and it lets you have a bit of fun. It's not too intrusive, or it's not like this nanny that's sort of like sitting in the back seat kind of thing. Sorry, Josh. That sort of comes in and ruins the fun just as you're getting into it. Like when I drive a car, like when I drive one of these cars, I never feel like I need to turn the ESP off because it's too intrusive. I'm still having a really great time in the car with it.
Yeah, exactly. Like unless you really want to set the tyres alight in like third gear drifts, then there's no real point undoing the ESP in it, which isn't the case in many models. So if I had to say, you hear those burbles, I love those burbles, pops and bangs. If there is one problem about this car, it's the fuel thirst.
Oh yeah.
This car is insanely thirsty.
If you use the performance, you can. It's almost like you can visibly see the fuel needle moving.
I mean, I've been driving this thing mainly around town. I've done not many Ks in it, maybe 250 or maybe 300 Ks perhaps, and it swallowed $100 worth of fuel the other night. I was like, ouch. And that's and I haven't been out on a test, hasn't been on a track day or anything like that. Yeah. So it's pretty. I mean, it's worth it because you get the engine and the power. But man, if you're gonna buy one of these LSA cars, you're gonna want to get used to
as well.
Yeah, the Club Sport now as well. We're gonna get used to sticking a lot of fuel in it very regularly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. If you go for a long, sort of spirited drive, if you like, it feels like every time you glance down at the fuel gauge, it's moved again, and you're like, oh geez, it must have a smaller tank in this.
Yeah, and then you still stick 70 litres. Yeah, it's something you need to think about if you take it for a big drive, because you're like, I better plan my fuel stops pretty carefully, otherwise it's because it's such a big engine, you can't just back it off and go, I'll do 5 litres per 100k for the rest now. You're still going to be doing 12 or 13, so you can... wonder how many people run out of fuel in their HSVs.
You keep a jerry can in the boot, I reckon, if you have one of these, an empty one. Another thing with these cars is they can have an alarming appetite for front tyres if you're on an abrasive kind of road.
That's true. I remember the Maloo R8 LSA we had on that test, and we went to the front tyres in 2 days on the road. Oops. Sorry, HSV.
I was driving that car and I was sort of like trying not to like destroy the rear tyres in it, which sort of makes complete sense, only to get out of it and go, the front tyres, whoops. Yeah,
whoops. It seems to be a Continental thing on... Yeah, the Continental tyres are really great, and I can see why HSV choose them, because wet weather performance, they really, I mean, remember when we had at Picotti, the Club Sport on a soaking wet Winton track, you think, oh man, this thing's going to be a handful, and it was better than almost any other car there because of the Continental tyres. But the flip side of that is they disappear at an alarming rate if you're on a dry, hot track. So, another thing, if you're going to track day this car, you'd want a decent bill for fuel and a decent bill for tyres, that's for sure. Yeah,
like they're great tyres, they're really grippy and they feel really good to drive on, but they're not amazingly durable if you use them. So, but yeah, you're right. It is difficult to fault this car. Of course, it's not perfect.
So one of those things, like you find yourself nitpicking. Like for instance, especially because it's got such a good front end, I always feel like I want a bit more steering precision. Yeah. Just off centre in this car, it feels like the steering's a little bit slow. But then you find yourself picking on problems like that and going, oh, okay, I'm nitpicking a bit here is because there's not a lot else to complain about. Yeah. It sounds really sycophantic and, you're being all patriotic and, bigging up the Aussie product. But this is an amazing car. Like, it's hard to believe that this car, like the GTS model, is only going to be built for another couple of weeks. Yeah. And it actually fills me with a bit of sadness. This is probably the last time drive one of these.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're about to drop this car back to HSV, and Motors had a long history with HSV. We're in Clayton now. We're around the corner from where this car is built, and that's something in the back of our minds, is that they're not going to be making these cars for much longer. This car in particular, as you said, its production is about to end.
Just to clarify, they'll keep making GTSR models and W1s, but they're about to shift their production line. So the actual HSV GTS, this model, it's only going down the line for another couple of weeks, which is pretty sad. I suppose as we enter HSV's facility right now, it's I suppose the one positive is we don't know what HSV is going to do next, and we really actually don't know what they're going to do next. I don't know if they know what they're going to do next in terms of a performance model, but I suppose the engineers that created this car and made these cars so good will be working on something. So hopefully they can make the same magic happen.
Yeah, that's right. If you've got one of these cars, well done to you. You've genuinely got an awesome car in the driveway, and you should be very happy with it. You probably are, but yeah, it is does fill one with pride to drive a car like this. Australia can actually make a world-class performance car, and a really good value one at that. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our first ever motor podcast. Let us know what you liked. If there's a car you want us to cover, if there's a topic you want us to cover, just let us know in the comments below. You can watch us on YouTube or listen to the podcast, and we'll see you next time.